Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my channel. I'm Ben. Today, we step into a chilling small-town tragedy, a summer night in Florence County, where a 6-year-old boy was found shot multiple times on a lonely country road, his phone still buzzing with unanswered calls, and whispers in the community hinting that this meeting was no accident. June air hangs thick over North First Neck Road. The pines barely move. Headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, and somewhere past the ditch line, a cell phone glows face down. Screen cracked, still buzzing with calls that won't be answered. At 11:30 p.m., deputies roll up on a body in the gravel teenage frame. Sneakers kicked half off, a trail of brass that caught the moon like tiny mirrors. Multiple shots, no wallet missing, no tire tracks that make sense. Just the silence of country South Carolina, swallowing the sound of sirens as they arrive late to a terrible ending. A patrolman kneels, checks for a pulse he knows isn't there. The radio crackles, scene secured, notify Sid, get the coroner moving. Beyond the tree line, a farmhouse porch light flickers and dies. Nobody admits to seeing anything. Nobody wants to say they heard the bursts, counted them, and held their breath. The road feels like a dead end to a life that should have been driving the other way. On the shoulder, a small memorial begins almost as soon as word spreads. A hoodie, a folded note, a name in black marker. Folks will say he was 16, a kid who shouldn't be chalked into a crime scene diagram. They'll say he wasn't perfect, but who is at 16? They'll say he knew the person who pulled that trigger, that the last conversation wasn't with a stranger. That's the piece that sticks in the gut and won't let go. Detectives sweep the phone. A thread of messages points to a meeting that should have been nothing more than talk. The coordinates line up with this road, this hour, this outcome. And the first whisper inside the sheriff's office isn't about drugs or territory or money. It's about something pettier, smaller, the kind of motive adults tend to dismiss until they're staring at a body on gravel and a community that will never be the same. If this wasn't a random ambush, then someone wanted him here, right here, on a night this quiet, with no witnesses and no way out. The only question is, who set the table, and why so many teenagers showed up to play? Florence County, South Carolina, is the kind of place where summer heat presses down like a weight, and everyone knows more about you than they admit. Trey Wright grew up here, 16 years old. Wiry frame, a smile that flashed easy when he was with friends. He played pickup basketball at the local park, sometimes until the lights clicked off. His teachers say he was bright when he cared to be, restless when he didn't. Trey lived with his mother, a woman who worked long shifts and kept her faith in small, steady ways, prayer before meals. A photo of Trey as a toddler taped to the fridge. His father was around, but not in the way that leaves deep roots. Friends remember Trey as fiercely loyal, quick to defend those he cared about, and just as quick to let you know if you'd crossed him. Then there was Devan, 18, the kind of young man who seemed determined to wear his rebellion like a badge. On TikTok, he posed with a glare, flipping the camera off, captions that read like grievances carved into wet concrete. He wasn't from Trey's inner circle, but the two knew each other. They followed each other online. They were linked by the thinnest thread, thin enough that it might have frayed to nothing if not for a girl. Her name, Gianna Kistenmacher, 17. Blonde hair, cheerleader's poise, a smile that could light up a stadium. On the surface, she was the kind of high schooler parents wanted their kids to befriend. But according to investigators, she was also the hinge on which this entire story swung. By early summer, whispers circled. Trey and Devan were both connected to Gianna. Some said Trey was dating her. Others claimed she'd been closer to Devan before things soured. What's certain is that there was tension messages traded in public and private, half threats wrapped in sarcasm, screenshots that made their way through group chats. For teenagers in a small town, these weren't just idle dramas, they were battles fought on the main stage of social media, where an insult could be liked, shared, and burned into memory in seconds. Gianna, according to deputies, knew about the rivalry. She also knew, they say, that Devan had a gun. And on the 24th of June, she agreed to drive him to meet Trey. It's easy, from a distance, to dismiss it as adolescent chaos, just kids playing at grown-up stakes. But in Florence County that summer, these were choices with gravity. Trey's life was already under pressure. The push to graduate, the pull of friendships, the constant need to navigate who was with you and who wasn't. No one in his family imagined that an argument over loyalty and affection could turn into a fatal appointment on a dark country road. But someone in that circle was about to make sure it did. And the closer you look at each player, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't a simple triangle, it was a web, tightening with every passing day. The 24th of June, 2024, started like any other summer Monday in Florence County. By nightfall, the air was still heavy, cicadas humming in the tree line, and the back roads lay mostly empty. But in the hours before midnight, a series of small, deliberate moves set the stage for a killing. According to investigators, Gianna Kistenmacher was in contact with both Trey Wright and Devan that day. Messages moved back and forth short, sharp exchanges that hinted at tension, but didn't spell out the violence to come. At some point, Gianna and Devan arranged to meet Trey on North First Neck Road, a stretch of asphalt flanked by woods and farmland, far from the glow of town. Devan wasn't coming empty-handed. Deputies say he had a firearm, a detail Gianna allegedly knew. Whether Trey realized this is still unclear. To him, it may have been just another confrontation, the kind teenagers convince themselves they can control. Witness timelines suggest that shortly after 11 p.m., Gianna's car with Devan inside was seen heading toward the meeting spot. Somewhere else, Trey was on his way to alone. No cameras captured the rendezvous. This was a place chosen precisely for its absence of eyes. What happened in the next few minutes is pieced together from ballistic evidence, shell casings, and the position of Trey's body. The meeting, if there were words exchanged at all, escalated quickly. A burst of gunfire shattered the quiet, the muzzle flashes briefly lighting up the tree line. Multiple rounds hit Trey, striking his torso inside. He collapsed onto the gravel, sneakers skidding, one coming loose. By the time the first 911 call was placed, the shooter was already gone. Deputies arrived to find the body lying near the road's edge, his phone just feet away, its screen fractured, still buzzing. The shell casings glinted in their flashlight beams. No signs of robbery, no vehicle matching witness descriptions lingering nearby. Whoever had been there left fast and left nothing obvious behind. The weapon was not recovered at the scene, nor were their footprints clear enough to tie to a suspect. But in the digital age, evidence often survives in less tangible forms. Deputies began pulling phone records, geolocation pings, and social media logs. The picture that emerged wasn't of a random attack, it was of a planned encounter, with more than one participant knowing that confrontation was inevitable. News of Trey's death spread before sunrise. At the corner store where he sometimes bought sodas, the clerk heard it from a customer who'd driven past the flashing lights. On Snapchat and TikTok, posts with LLT Long Live Trey began circulating, grief mixing with outrage. But what made the case more chilling was the circle of people implicated. In the following days, not only were Devan and Gianna Kistenmacher charged, but more names surfaced. Hunter Kendall, Sydney Kearns, Corinne Belviso, and several others still underage and unnamed. 9 in total, all teenagers, all facing murder charges under South Carolina's hands of one, hands of all principle. It meant that if one person pulled the trigger, anyone who helped set the trap could be charged as if they had fired the shots themselves. And prosecutors were making it clear they believed this killing was not the act of a lone gunman, but the end result of a group decision. For Trey, the confrontation ended in seconds. For Florence County, the questions would stretch on for years. How does a high school rivalry metastasize into an orchestrated killing? And how many people have to touch the plan before they all carry its weight? The investigation began the moment deputies secured the scene on North First Neck Road. Floodlights bathed the gravel in stark white, casting long shadows of uniforms as detectives marked each shell casing with yellow placards. Crime scene techs photographed the body, then the surrounding ground, working in precise arcs. First came the physical evidence: 9mm shell casings, trajectory patterns, and the position of Trey Wright's phone. The phone, still powered on when found, would prove to be the first key. Forensic specialists extracted recent messages and location data, revealing that Trey's final movements were not random. The coordinates placed him within a few yards of the spot where he died minutes after receiving messages from someone he knew. The next step was canvassing. Detectives moved door to door along the sparse rural stretch, speaking to residents who lived within earshot of the gunfire. A few admitted to hearing pops around 11:30 p.m., but most claimed they stayed inside, unwilling to get involved. One witness, however, mentioned seeing a vehicle, possibly a sedan, leaving the area fast, without headlights. Back at the sheriff's office, digital forensics took center stage. Social media accounts tied to both Trey and the suspects were pulled for review. Investigators saw public posts laced with veiled threats, mocking comments, and the kind of cryptic captions that mean little to outsiders, but plenty to those involved. Group chat histories began to suggest that the meeting on the 24th of June was not spontaneous. It had been orchestrated. By cross-referencing cell tower data, deputies confirmed that Gianna Kistenmacher's phone traveled the route from Myrtle Beach toward Florence County that night. Her passenger, investigators allege, was Devan Raper. Text records suggested she knew he was armed and that a confrontation was likely. Within days, arrest warrants were issued for both Raper and Kistenmacher. Raper was denied bond, facing a direct murder charge. Kistenmacher, initially charged as an accessory before the fact, saw her charges upgraded to murder. But the arrests didn't stop there. New warrants named Hunter Kendall, Sidney Kearns, and Corinne Belviso, all teenagers, as co-defendants in the murder. 4 other suspects, minors whose names were withheld, were also taken into custody. In total, 9 charged. Prosecutors invoked South Carolina's hands of one, hands of all doctrine, asserting that anyone who knowingly aided in bringing Raper to Trey was equally culpable. It was a bold move rarely used for homicide, especially when all defendants are this young. Bond hearings drew local attention. Some suspects were released on $20,000 bonds, prompting criticism from community members who saw the amount as insultingly low for a murder charge. Defense attorneys argued their clients did not fire the weapon and were being overcharged. Behind the scenes, the solicitor's office prepared for a complex case with multiple defendants, overlapping timelines, and a mix of physical and digital evidence. They knew the path forward could involve plea deals reducing charges for some in exchange for testimony against others. But for now, every name on that charge sheet carried the same weight: murder. The question was whether the evidence could convince a jury that 9 people, through actions and intent, shared the responsibility for one boy's death. The first court appearances were a spectacle in themselves. The small General Sessions courtroom in Florence County filled quickly. Family members, reporters, and curious locals pressed into the wooden benches. The air buzzed with low murmurs, the creak of the judge's chair the only sound that silenced the room. Devan Raper was brought in first, wearing the standard orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed. He didn't make eye contact with the gallery. When called to speak, he surprised everyone, launching into a declaration that he didn't do none of this, and that 4 more people had been involved. The judge cut him off sharply, reminding him that anything he said could be used against him, and that this was not the time to argue the facts. His defense attorney's jaw tightened as he guided his client back into silence. Gianna Kistenmacher appeared next, dressed in civilian clothes after posting bond under strict conditions. She kept her gaze low, her hair pulled back neatly, and spoke only to confirm her identity. Prosecutors outlined the upgraded murder charge against her, arguing that she knowingly transported Raper to a meeting she understood could end in violence. Then came the others: Hunter Kendall, tall and expressionless; Sidney Kearns, who kept glancing toward her parents; and Corinne Belviso, whose arrest had shocked those who knew her as a cheerleader and model student. Each stood as the clerk read out the same charge: murder, under the doctrine of hands of one, hands of all. The prosecution's early strategy was clear: paint a picture of coordination, not coincidence. In their opening remarks, they described the defendants as a group that acted in concert, emphasizing shared intent over individual actions. They hinted at digital evidence messages, call logs, possibly even video that would tie the group together in the hours leading up to Trey Wright's death. Defense attorneys pushed back. Several argued that their clients were merely present and had no knowledge of any plan to kill. One pointed to the low bond amounts as proof that the state's own assessment of danger was inconsistent with a murder charge. Spectators noticed the split in demeanor among the defendants. Some sat stiff and stone-faced. Others whispered to their lawyers, occasionally blinking back tears. The weight of adult charges hung over all of them, regardless of whether they were still in high school or barely out of it. The judge scheduled preliminary hearings for each defendant, warning that the state's timeline could stretch well into the next year, given the number of co-defendants. Outside the courthouse, news crews crowded the steps, their cameras catching every exit and every fragment of a statement. For the Wright family, the proceedings were a first glimpse of the people accused of orchestrating their son's death. They sat together, hands clasped, their grief a silent anchor in the room. And as the session adjourned, one question lingered in the minds of everyone present. How much of the state's case would survive the challenges ahead? And who, if anyone, would ultimately stand trial for murder? To understand how 9 teenagers ended up facing a murder charge, you have to look beyond the legal documents and into the human dynamics that shaped this case. The tension between Trey Wright and Devan Raper was more than just a personal grudge. It was a collision of identity, pride, and the performative culture of adolescence, amplified by social media. Trey was protective, sometimes to a fault. Friends say he didn't back down from confrontation, especially if he felt disrespected. In a small community, that trait can be a badge of honor, but it also paints a target. Devan, by contrast, cultivated a rebellious, defiant persona. His online posts weren't just expressions of mood. They were crafted performances for an audience of peers, each one designed to reinforce his image as someone not to be crossed. Gianna Kistenmacher occupied a different axis in this triangle, not just as the love interest in the headlines, but as a connector between social circles. Her choices, whether intentional or careless, carried weight because they influenced how the others perceived loyalty and betrayal. To Trey, her actions may have signaled a breach of trust. To Devan, they may have been an opportunity to reassert dominance. From a psychological standpoint, this wasn't about a single decision, it was about escalation. Small provocations turned into public statements. Sarcasm became insult. Insult became challenge. And challenge demanded a response. Social media fueled it, transforming private tensions into public scoreboards, where every like or comment could tilt the balance. For the others charged, the psychology is more complex. Not all of them may have wanted violence. Some might have seen it as just being there for a friend, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge how far things could go. This is where the hands of one, hands of all doctrine intersects with human behavior. The law doesn't measure intent in degrees when it comes to participation in a felony. If you help set the stage, you share the consequences of the final act. Legally, the prosecution's challenge will be proving shared intent, showing that each defendant knew the meeting could end in Trey's death and acted anyway. Psychologically, shared intent is easier to imagine than to prove. Teenagers often operate in echo chambers, reinforcing each other's narratives without questioning the endgame. In that echo chamber, the possibility of tragedy can feel distant until it's immediate. This case also raises questions about impulse control and foresight in adolescent brains. Research shows that the prefrontal cortex, responsible for risk assessment and decision-making, isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. That doesn't excuse criminal behavior, but it does frame how quickly a group of young people can make irreversible choices under the influence of emotion, peer pressure, or perceived disrespect. And then there's the aftermath of the act itself. One of the most haunting details is Corinne Belviso's Facebook post the day after Trey's death, calling him a friend and urging donations to his family. Was it guilt? Denial? An attempt to distance herself from suspicion? Or was it simply a compartmentalization, separating the person she knew from the events she was part of? In the end, the psychology of this case is as tangled as the legal web. It's about identity, ego, peer dynamics, and the dangerous ways those can converge when weapons are involved. The law will focus on evidence. The jury will also feel the weight of the human story behind it. And in that space between fact and emotion, the fate of 9 young defendants will be decided. In the weeks after Trey Wright's death, Florence County carried the weight of grief and disbelief. Candlelight vigils lit up the small park where Trey used to shoot hoops. Friends and classmates wore shirts with LLT Long Live Trey printed across the front. On social media, tributes mixed with anger, and the hashtag became both a memorial and a rallying cry for justice. The legal proceedings moved slowly, as they always do in cases with multiple defendants. Families on both sides began living parallel lives, one side navigating loss, the other navigating defense strategies. In a town this size, everyone knew someone connected to the case, and that closeness magnified the tension. The hands of one, hands of all charges became a subject of public debate. Supporters saw it as a necessary message that anyone who helped set the stage for violence must be held fully accountable. Critics argued it was overreach, a legal hammer falling on teenagers whose roles varied widely. The low bonds for some defendants continued to spark outrage, raising questions about consistency in the justice system. For the Wright family, the impact was irreversible. Trey's mother spoke at a vigil, her voice breaking as she thanked the community for standing by her family. She said she wanted people to remember her son for his loyalty, his laugh, and the way he lit up a room, not just for the way he died. Schools in the area quietly implemented more programs addressing conflict resolution and the dangers of escalating disputes online. Local leaders pointed to the case as a wake-up call, urging parents to monitor their children's social circles and social media habits more closely. But the emotional legacy is harder to measure. Friends of the defendants grappled with the shock of seeing people they once shared classrooms and football bleachers with now facing decades in prison. For them, the case was a collision between the world they thought they knew and the reality of what can happen when adolescent pride, loyalty, and access to a gun converge. Years from now, Florence County will still remember the summer when 9 teenagers stood accused of killing one of their own. The trials, verdicts, and possible plea deals will eventually become part of the public record. But for those who lived it, the real memory will be the night a quiet country road turned into a crime scene, and the way it left a community forever changed. The story of Trey Wright's death is more than just a shocking murder case. It's a powerful warning about the destructive mix of pride, peer pressure, and gun violence among young people. Just a series of poor choices over a few hours took the life of a 6-year-old boy and sent 9 other teenagers into the criminal justice system, facing sentences that could last decades. In America, where a firearm can often be within a few steps' reach, combining that access with impulsive emotions and personal conflicts can have devastating consequences. This is a reminder to practice self-control, seek peaceful solutions to disputes, and understand that even one word or action can completely alter the course of a life. What do you think about the hands of one, hands of all principle applied in this case? Is it fair when used against people who didn't actually pull the trigger? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story gave you something to think about, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into real crime cases. Every share helps more people recognize the importance of preventing tragedies like this before they happen.